The courtroom was silent, holding its breath. Cameras clicked, reporters leaned in, and Rachel Miller clutched her chest like she was holding in the weight of a decade. At the center of it all, Ethan stood. No longer the 10-year-old boy who vanished without a trace, but a man now, forged in pain. He stared at the man in handcuffs across the room. Thomas Greaves. The name still made his skin crawl. The man who had stolen his childhood, shattered his family, and left invisible scars that refused to fade. Every part of Ethan's body pulsed with memory. Locked doors, whispered threats, sleepless nights, a small window that never opened. The judge asked if he had something to say. Ethan stood still for a moment, then walked forward. Eyes locked, breaths uneven. A pause. "I forgive you." Gasps filled the room. Rachel's sob broke the silence. Even Thomas looked stunned. Ethan didn't flinch. "I'm not forgiving you for you. I'm forgiving you so I can breathe again." No one knew what to say, but something changed that day. A man chose peace over rage, and the world wasn't ready for that kind of bravery. If stories like this move you, raw, real, unforgettable, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. Every week, we reveal the unspoken battles people survive. Join a community that sees beyond pain into power. Don't just watch, belong. The next story might change how you see the world or yourself. Ethan Miller grew up in the kind of neighborhood where people waved from their porches and kids rode their bikes until the streetlights came on. His world was small but warm. A 2-story house with yellow shutters, a chocolate lab named Max, and bedtime stories read by his mother Rachel, who smelled like lavender and always sang off-key. He was a curious boy, the kind who asked too many questions and got lost in his own imagination. His room was filled with maps and drawings of secret caves, and he often dreamed of being an explorer. His father, David, encouraged his adventurous spirit, building makeshift forts in the backyard and pretending to be a wild animal Ethan had to track. But underneath all the joy, Ethan was a sensitive soul. Loud noises made him flinch. Darkness unsettled him, and whenever his mom left the room, he'd count to 60 and breathe slower, just to stay calm. He had a deep fear of being alone, an anxiety nobody really understood, not even him. Still, he was happy. He felt safe. He had never crossed a street without holding someone's hand. He had never walked to school alone. He had never even spent the night at a friend's house. Until one morning, when Rachel gave him permission to go to the bakery by himself. It was just 2 blocks away. Ethan begged for it. "I can do it, Mom, I promise." She hesitated, then smiled and handed him a $5 bill. "Be careful, sweetheart." He beamed with pride, gripping the bill tight as he stepped outside. The sun was bright, the birds were chirping, and for the first time in his young life, Ethan felt like the world belonged to him. That feeling wouldn't last. All Ethan wanted was to be brave. Not the kind of brave you see in superhero movies, but the kind that makes your parents trust you with just a little more freedom. He didn't want to save the world. He just wanted to cross the street alone, buy a loaf of bread, and feel like a grown-up. That day felt like a turning point. He had begged his mom all week to let him go to Dawson's bakery alone. "It's just around the corner," he'd say. "I know how to look both ways. I'm not a baby anymore." Rachel had always been overprotective, but something in Ethan's eyes that morning made her pause. He was 10, after all. Maybe it was time for him to try. She kissed his forehead and handed him a crumpled $5 bill. "I'll be right here when you get back," she said. The sun was warm on his skin as he stepped out the door. With Max barking from the porch, Ethan felt powerful, like a real explorer setting off on his first expedition. The sidewalk stretched out in front of him, like a road to somewhere bigger than he'd ever imagined. He passed the Wilsons' house, then the little park with the rusty swings, then Mrs. Clark's flower garden. He waved to a mailman. Everything felt normal, but also brand new. Inside the bakery, he could barely see over the counter. "1 loaf of honey wheat, please," he said, proud of his steady voice. "Coming right up, young man." the woman smiled. With the warm loaf in hand, Ethan stepped back onto the sidewalk, the scent of fresh bread wrapping around him like a blanket. He was already imagining how proud his mom would be. And then he saw the car. It was parked halfway down the block, engine idling. A man leaned out the window, smiling. He looked familiar. Maybe from the park. Maybe a friend of his dad's. "Hey there, champ," the man said. "Your mom told me to pick you up. She got called into work and didn't want you walking home alone." Ethan froze, loaf in hand. "But she said she'd be home." "She called me just a few minutes ago," the man insisted. "Hop in. Let's not keep her waiting." The man's voice was smooth, calm, reassuring. Ethan took one step closer, just one, and that was all it took. The door clicked shut behind him, and everything changed. Ethan didn't realize it right away. At first, the car smelled like leather and peppermint gum. The man kept talking, about nothing important. "How's school? You like baseball?" His voice was smooth, almost friendly, but the streets looked wrong. They didn't turn onto Maple Avenue like they should have. They passed a gas station Ethan didn't recognize. The bakery was already out of sight. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked, gripping the loaf tighter. "Shortcut," the man said, eyes on the road. "Don't worry." The loaf slipped from Ethan's fingers. He wanted to speak again, but his voice stayed caught in his throat. The man turned up the radio. A happy song played. It made everything worse. After 20 minutes, the car pulled into a gravel driveway behind an old cabin, half hidden by trees. The windows were boarded up. There were no other cars, no people. Ethan's heart pounded so loudly he could hear it in his ears. "Come on," the man said, opening the passenger door. Ethan didn't move. The man grabbed his arm. The cabin was dark and smelled like dust and mold. A single mattress lay in the corner, next to a bucket and a stack of old magazines. The only light came from a tiny window so high up Ethan couldn't reach it, even if he stood on the mattress. Thomas, he would later learn the man's name was Thomas Greaves, locked the door behind them. "You'll stay here for a bit," he said, almost like he was explaining bedtime to a child. "Be good, and everything will be fine." Ethan didn't cry that night. He just sat in the corner, knees to his chest, staring at the door, waiting for it to open again, waiting for this to be a mistake, waiting for his mom, but no one came. Days passed, or maybe weeks. He lost track of time quickly. Sometimes Thomas brought food, sometimes he didn't. Sometimes he spoke kindly, other times he screamed over nothing at all. Ethan stopped talking, stopped asking questions. He learned to be quiet, to disappear, to wait. The world outside that cabin shrunk to a silent, terrifying rhythm. Light through the window meant day, silence meant night. Every sound was a threat, every footstep a warning. His world, once so bright and full of wonder, was now a locked room with no answers. And Ethan, at just 10 years old, was learning what it meant to be completely alone. The silence was the worst part, not the fear, not the hunger, not even the screams that sometimes echoed through the wooden walls when Thomas was angry. It was the emptiness between those moments, the hours when nothing happened, when Ethan was left with only the sound of his own breath and the crushing weight of waiting. Time stopped existing. Daylight through the tiny window meant nothing anymore. It could be morning or evening, summer or winter. He didn't know. He didn't ask. He had learned not to ask. His body grew thinner. His cheeks lost their roundness. His voice, once curious and loud, became a whisper he barely used. There were days he didn't speak at all. Sometimes Thomas would sit in the corner and talk like they were friends. He'd tell stories about his own childhood, about how the world had hurt him too. Ethan didn't understand most of it, but he recognized something. A broken man trying to make sense of his own chaos by creating it in someone else. But other times Thomas would disappear, hours, maybe days, and Ethan would be left without food, without words, without a face to hate. He didn't even cry anymore. Crying made him dizzy. Crying made it real. He created games in his head to survive, counting the floorboards, imagining he was on a spaceship, pretending that if he stayed perfectly still, he'd become invisible. He talked to Max, his dog, in his mind. He imagined what his mum would say if she was sitting beside him. He'd whisper, "I'm still here, Mom. I didn't disappear." But inside, he was vanishing. Then one night, everything changed. He heard voices outside, real voices, footsteps, a bang on the door. He crawled to the corner, thinking Thomas had returned angry, louder than ever. But then the door flew open, and light poured in. "Ethan," a man called. "Ethan Miller?" The name sounded foreign, like it belonged to someone else. A flashlight landed on his face. He flinched. A figure knelt beside him. A badge, a uniform, a soft voice. "You're safe now, buddy. We've got you." But Ethan didn't move, couldn't. He didn't believe it. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and blankets and faces he didn't recognize. Nurses asked questions he couldn't answer. His mother's sobs, when she saw him again, weren't joyful. They were broken. She hugged him so tight he couldn't breathe. But he didn't hug her back. He didn't feel like her son anymore. At home, things didn't go back to normal. His room felt strange, like a place he had never been. The walls were too clean, the light too bright. His toys looked like they belonged to someone else. He had nightmares, woke up screaming, hid under his bed, refused to go outside. School was impossible. Other kids stared, some whispered, some were kind, but it didn't matter. He felt like a ghost among them, present, but not really there. His parents tried, therapy sessions, quiet afternoons with board games, homemade cookies, but Ethan couldn't find his way back. One night, sitting alone in his room, he tore one of his old maps in half. It used to be his favorite, the one with treasure islands and secret caves. But now it felt like a lie. There was no treasure, no escape, no adventure. Just a boy who had gone on a journey and never truly returned. He didn't know how to talk about the cabin, about the smells, the silence, the fear, about the confusion of being both hated and pitied, about the man who sometimes acted like a father and other times like a monster. He didn't even know what he was supposed to feel. Everyone kept saying, "You're safe now," but safe didn't feel like anything. It felt like nothing, and nothing was worse than fear, because fear meant you still felt something. Ethan wasn't scared anymore. He was just gone. If any part of this story is touching something deep inside you, take a moment, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters here. You're not alone. Sometimes just writing what you feel is the first step toward healing. We're listening. We're with you. He was 16 the first time he heard the sentence that would change his life. It happened in a therapy session he didn't want to attend. Ethan had already cycled through 3 therapists. Each time, he sat in silence, arms crossed, waiting for the hour to pass. He hated the pity in their eyes, hated their soft voices, hated being reminded of something he tried every day to forget. But Dr. Karen Whitmore was different. She didn't ask many questions. She didn't force him to talk. She just waited week after week, while Ethan sat in silence, until one afternoon, out of nowhere, she said, "You are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become." The sentence struck him like a crack of thunder, not because he believed it, but because deep down he wanted to. That night, Ethan stared at the ceiling in his dark room, repeating those words. He was tired of being frozen, tired of avoiding mirrors, crowds, parks, bakeries, tired of feeling like a ghost of a boy who never came back. He began writing, not stories or poems, letters, first to himself, then to Thomas. At first they were angry, furious, pages filled with things he couldn't say out loud. But something strange happened the more he wrote. The words stopped being about Thomas. They became about Ethan, about the things he lost, the pain he carried, the person he wanted to be. He started to remember who he was before everything, how he used to dream of being an explorer, how he loved honey wheat bread, how he used to think the world was big and beautiful. He missed that version of himself, not the innocence, but the hope. So he kept writing, every night, one letter after another, dozens of them, letters he never planned to send, until one day he did. He asked Dr. Whitmore if it was possible to contact someone in prison. She didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, it was gentle but firm. Only if you know why you want to. And Ethan did. Not for closure, not for revenge, but because the weight of silence was crushing him, and he wanted to be free. He wrote the letter carefully. No threats, no hatred, just truth. He told Thomas what he took, but also what Ethan had decided to reclaim. His life. The first time Ethan stood in front of a classroom to talk about what happened, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the microphone. He wasn't there to tell the full story, not yet. Just to speak to a group of high school students about surviving trauma, how healing wasn't linear, how silence can be a shield, and how one sentence can open a door you didn't know existed. He kept it simple, honest. When it was over, a girl approached him, eyes full of something he recognized, pain buried deep. She didn't say much, just thank you. That was the moment Ethan realized his voice could do something his silence never could, help others feel less alone. He began volunteering at youth centers, at first just listening, then sharing. Slowly, his identity started shifting. No longer just the boy who was kidnapped, he was becoming Ethan again. A version shaped by pain, yes, but also by resilience. At home, things changed too. Rachel and David, still walking on emotional eggshells, started to open up. They cried with him instead of around him. They stopped pretending everything was okay, and that honesty, raw and imperfect, brought them closer than before. For the first time in years, Ethan slept through the night. He brought Max to the park again, ate honey wheat bread without flinching, laughed, not just a polite chuckle, but real, from the stomach laughter, when David tripped over the garden hose. He even went back to the bakery, the same one. The woman behind the counter had aged, her hair now streaked with silver. She looked at him for a long moment before saying, "You've grown." "I'm trying," Ethan replied with a half smile. He started writing articles for local newspapers, sharing thoughts on healing, forgiveness, and mental health, not as a victim, but as a survivor. His words resonated. People reached out. Some shared their own stories. Some just said, "Me too." And then something he never expected happened. He was invited to speak at a state trauma conference. He almost said no, but something inside him, maybe that 10-year-old boy who once wanted to explore the world, whispered, "You're ready." So he went. On stage, with hundreds of eyes on him, Ethan told his story. Not the details of the cabin, but the truth of what came after. The silence, the rage, the moment he chose to forgive, not because Thomas deserved it, but because Ethan deserved peace. When he stepped off the stage, the applause didn't matter. What mattered was that he no longer felt like a prisoner of his past. He was building something new, and it had just begun. Healing wasn't a straight line, and Ethan knew that now. For every step forward, there were nights when he couldn't sleep. Mornings when the world felt too loud. Days when someone's tone or touch sent him spiraling back into that cabin, even if just for a moment. The letter he sent to Thomas had remained unanswered for months. Part of him was relieved. Another part waited every day, dreading what might come back. Then, one afternoon it arrived. A plain envelope, no return address, no name. Just shaky handwriting that read, "Ethan." Inside was a single page. Thomas said he had read the letter over and over. He admitted to remembering every detail, not proudly, but with shame. Said he didn't expect forgiveness, didn't believe he deserved it, but he thanked Ethan for writing, for not forgetting, for being alive. Ethan didn't know how to feel. He stared at the letter for hours, hating how it made his heart race, hating how it still gave Thomas space in his mind. He brought it to Dr. Whitmore. She read it silently, then asked, "Do you want to meet him?" The thought hit Ethan like ice. Why would he? But the question wouldn't leave him. Weeks passed. then months. He kept living, working with kids, speaking at events, but something in him felt unfinished. There was one part of the story he hadn't faced, one door still closed. And so, he asked. Through the proper channels, under heavy supervision, Ethan was granted a prison visit. The drive there was quiet. Rachel offered to come, but Ethan insisted on going alone. He needed to do this for himself. He walked through metal detectors, signed papers, was led down long corridors filled with grey and silence. And then, a small room. 2 chairs, a glass divider. Thomas entered, thinner than he remembered, older, weaker. Their eyes met. Neither spoke for a full minute. When Ethan finally did, his voice cracked. "I'm not here for answers." Thomas nodded. "I wouldn't know what to say if you were." The conversation was short, awkward, filled with long silences and half-sentences, but it ended with something Ethan didn't expect, a quiet kind of closure. He didn't feel lighter, but he felt clearer. On the way out, the guard asked, "You okay?" Ethan didn't answer. He just nodded. Outside, he breathed in the air, cold, sharp, real. It didn't erase the past, but it reminded him that he wasn't trapped anymore. The second visit wasn't about curiosity. It was about choice. Ethan didn't need to see Thomas again. He didn't owe him anything. But he returned, this time not to confront the man who had stolen his childhood, but to confront himself, to finish what had begun with a letter and then a single page in response. They met in a different room. No glass between them. Just 2 chairs, a plain table, and a clock ticking too loudly on the wall. Thomas looked surprised when Ethan walked in. He stood for a moment, unsure whether to offer his hand. He didn't. He sat. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said quietly. Ethan looked at him, really looked. This man was not a monster now, just a broken human being with hollow eyes and a face aged by regret. But Ethan wasn't there to understand Thomas. He was there to free himself. He spoke first. "You took everything from me. My safety, my voice, my sense of who I was." Thomas looked down, said nothing. "I lost years. I lost people. I lost the version of me that used to laugh without wondering what was about to go wrong." Thomas opened his mouth, but Ethan raised a hand. "I don't want an apology," he said. "I don't need it. I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to let you know that I'm done carrying you." Thomas blinked slowly, eyes wet. "You've every right to hate me." Ethan's voice softened, but not out of sympathy, out of strength. "I did hate you. For a long time. You lived in my head, in my nightmares, in my relationships. In every moment I doubted myself. You were there, but not anymore." He took a deep breath. "I forgive you." Thomas's shoulders dropped. He didn't smile. He didn't thank him. He just looked away, like the weight of those words was more than he deserved. "I'm forgiving you," Ethan continued, "not for your sake. Not because I think you've changed, but because I'm tired of letting what you did decide who I get to be." The silence that followed was unlike any Ethan had ever experienced. It wasn't empty. It was full. Of release, of surrender, of finality. He stood up. Thomas remained seated, hands clasped, eyes closed. As Ethan walked toward the door, he stopped for a moment and said, almost to himself, "I'm not your prisoner anymore." Then he left. Outside, the sun was blinding. Ethan shielded his eyes, took a deep breath, and let the air fill his lungs. He didn't cry. He didn't collapse. He didn't feel victorious. He felt still, like a lake after a storm. He drove back in silence. No music, no distractions. Just the sound of the road and the quiet realization that something inside him had shifted. That night, he sat on his porch, Max resting beside him, Rachel humming softly in the kitchen. He watched the stars and thought about the boy he used to be, the one with maps and dreams and a heart wide open, and he smiled. Not because he got his old self back, but because he had finally met the man he became, the man who chose peace, the man who survived, the man who forgave. Forgiveness is one of those words people use lightly, without understanding the weight it carries. Ethan learned that the hard way. For years, forgiveness sounded like betrayal, like letting Thomas off the hook, like pretending the past didn't happen. People told him he had to move on, as if healing was a switch you could flip. But what they didn't understand was that forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It wasn't about erasing the pain. It was about deciding the pain wouldn't own him anymore. Forgiveness, for Ethan, was an act of defiance. It was standing in front of the man who caused his deepest wounds and saying, "You don't get to live in me forever." The world often tells survivors to be strong, to keep going, but it rarely teaches them how. Ethan discovered that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's choosing not to hate, even when hate feels justified. Sometimes it's choosing to breathe, to stay, to rebuild. And above all, forgiveness isn't a gift you give to someone else. It's a gift you give to yourself. It's the moment you stop bleeding for someone else's mistake. And finally, begin to live again. Ethan didn't disappear after forgiving Thomas. He didn't retreat into silence or vanish from the public eye. Instead, he stepped fully into the life he had fought to reclaim. He went on to finish school, then studied psychology, not because he wanted to analyze trauma, but because he wanted to understand healing. He knew what it meant to feel broken. Now, he wanted to help others rebuild. He started a support group for survivors of childhood trauma. What began as a small circle in a church basement grew into a recognized non-profit organization. The Stillness Project, he called it, a name born from that one moment outside the prison under the sun, when he finally felt calm. Ethan didn't glamorize his story. He never claimed to have all the answers, but he shared openly, authentically. His vulnerability became a bridge for others to cross their own pain. He wrote a book too, not a memoir, but a reflection on choice, on how trauma rewrites your life and how you can still hold the pen. He never forgot what happened. He never stopped grieving the boy he might have been. But he also stopped waiting to feel whole, because he was already complete, just in a different way. What would you do if someone stole your childhood? Would you fight for justice, seek revenge, or would you choose something harder, something almost impossible? Would you forgive? Ethan's story isn't just about survival. It's about what we choose to carry and what we finally decide to let go. His journey forces us to ask, who are we when the worst has already happened? And more importantly, who do we want to become after? Now, it's your turn. What do you think? Could you have made the same choice Ethan did? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear your thoughts, your experiences, your questions. This space was made for you too. If this story moved you, share it. Someone you know might need it more than you realize. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Every week we bring you true emotional journeys, stories of people who were tested beyond the imaginable and still found a way forward. Because at the end of the day, we all carry something heavy, but sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is choose to let it go.